Good evening, everyone. We're going to continue our class based on Swami Kriyananda's Book of Letters. Let me just move this back so you won't bash it. In Divine Friendship. I'm Nayaswami Asha, and this is Keshava Betts. We'll start with a prayer, then Keshava will lead us in a couple of chants, a few minutes of meditation, and then we'll start. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, humbly we bow to you all. Dearest Swamiji, bless us with insight into your meaning. Help us to feel your consciousness. Help us to receive your guidance, that through your words we will feel your attunement with Master, and through your attunement we'll be brought into deeper attunement ourselves. We are your children. Guide, inspire, and bless us. Om. Peace. Amen.
Narayana Om Namo Narayana Om Namo Narayana Om Namo disturb you, nothing affright you, all things will pass, but God changes not. Patient endurance brings you to victory. Once you have God, you'll want nothing more. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. Let nothing disturb you, nothing affright you, all things will pass, but God changes not. Patient endurance brings you to victory. Once you have God, you'll want nothing more. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. Let nothing disturb you, nothing affright you, all things will pass, but God changes not. Patient endurance brings you to victory. Once you have God, you'll want nothing more. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. Let nothing disturb you, nothing affright you, all things will pass, but God changes not. Patient endurance brings you to victory. Once you have God, you'll want nothing more. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever need. God alone, God alone, God alone's all we ever
We'll meditate now for a few minutes. Om, peace. Amen. Well, friends, we are going to continue with this really wonderful book. I always feel like I have more and more to say about Swami Kriyananda that I never get a chance to say. since he was such a profoundly guiding influence in my life, but doing this book is helping. We're also preparing a podcast series based on living wisely, living well. It's not going to launch for a little while, so I'm really immersed in Swami Kriyananda's writings right now, and I must say I'm enjoying it thoroughly. And I hope you all will too. So, we are now in the section of this book. There's about a dozen sections here. Oh, there's maybe 20 sections in this book. And the one we're on now is called Advice and Encouragement. And it goes on for a while. It just characterizes it was just a way to organize the letters. Otherwise, they would just been, just all of these dozens and dozens of letters in random order. So we tried to, the collector of the book, who was a friend of mine, the editor, Naidruva, she tried to put them into categories where you sort of had a feeling of what you were looking at, either by subject or various other things. I was just looking. Swami Kriyananda's role, the art of writing. There's one section which is great fun, but we won't get it for a while. It's called Strong Medicine. And it was advice, but not so much encouragement, perhaps, but encouragement in a stronger way. But we're not there yet. We're just on advice and encouragement. So this letter is dated July 6, 1973. Contentment is an attitude to be deliberately practiced. It is not simply a state of mind that comes to one once things are going well. That sort of happiness can be lost in a second under the least setback. Whew, that's pretty strong, isn't it? Just right there, puh, to that kind of contentment. Contentment, however, if practiced determinedly, can remain with us under every circumstance. Good company, too, is important. Without it, contentment may be too difficult to practice steadfastly. If you could mix with contented people, you would automatically begin to acquire their magnetism and to grow in contentment yourself. That is why I have urged you to take your next vacation at Ananda. You would like it here, I'm sure. With love in God and Gurus and Swami Kriyananda. Okay, contentment is one of the yamas or niyamas. I always forget which one it is, but it's one of Patanjali's basic 10 rules for right living. And so it's a fundamental on the spiritual path that has enormous implications going out in lots of directions. And so Swami starts out by saying it's a practice. People tend to think of contentment as something that will be the result of getting everything just the way you want it. And so the first thing to understand is contentment is not a condition that happens to us. Contentment is a choice we make, and we make it with our willpower, and we make it independent of circumstances. I mean, that's a kind of a leap into the basic philosophy of yoga that you have to make before this advice makes any sense. I had a friend, it was actually a relative, back when I was very first starting on the spiritual path, which was in the mid-60s, it doesn't matter when, but I was just beginning to learn these teachings. And it was very interesting because he was an interesting person to talk to. He was older than I. He was interesting, and we liked to have conversation. We liked to talk about the meaning of life and how to live and so on. But we gradually, especially as I got more into self-realization, we would eventually reach an impasse, and the impasse was this. He believed that your life was determined by the circumstances, by your outer circumstances. Outer circumstances were the first defining quality, and your inner state would be dependent upon them. I believed that you determine your inner state, and your outer circumstances will either come to reflect the magnetism that you're putting out, or your inner state will develop independently of your circumstances. There was absolutely no way. They were completely irreconcilable. So to understand properly what Swami means by contentment, the way he describes it, we have to understand, just as exactly he says, it's a deliberate practice. Now, it's confusing to the mind because you think, if I don't have enough, I'm not earning enough to support my family in the way I want to support them, if the health of my body is not particularly good, if one of my children is in trouble and they're not doing well, it would seem like a betrayal of both common sense and responsibility to be content with that. So you have to understand contentment in a slightly different way. People tend to think that contentment leads to passivity, but that's a too shallow an understanding. Content doesn't mean I'm happy with circumstances as they are. It means that I'm not rebelling against the circumstances of my life. I'm content with what God has given me. And what God has given me is not just the static things that He's given me. What God has given me is the responsibilities and the commitments that come with them, and the necessity to discriminate clearly about what is being asked of me, but then not to lose any energy in discontent with what's being asked of me. Because you see, that's where the energy is lost. Swami has told this story often when he was, during the years that he was essentially single-handedly earning the money to buy the land and put up the buildings at the very beginning of the Ananda community, at the property that is now known as the seclusion retreat or the meditation retreat, 72 acres of land, and he put up about 4 domes, a temple, a kitchen, one for himself, and an office dome. So there were 4 domes that he had to earn the money and put up and pay the land. Because before he started the community, he wanted it to be debt-free. And he had to teach, he would teach 5 nights a week, 4 or 5 nights a week, in different cities around the Bay Area, which often entailed an hour or more of driving just to get to the class. Then he would have to teach the class, and he would drive back home to his parents' house where he was living at the time. He had all the business of Ananda, all the correspondence. He was often also writing books or was writing a set of correspondence lessons. And then after a while on the weekends, he would drive 4 hours up to where Ananda was. He would run retreats for the weekend. He was almost the only teacher. He had 1 or 2 people. Jyotish was with him even then, helping him. He would come back. He would start the whole cycle over. And one day he was just so tired of the whole thing. He was so tired, and as he often put it, he was also tired of. I remember once he came back from a journey and he wanted to go into seclusion. He said, "It's not really that I'm tired, I'm just tired of," whatever it was that followed after that word. So he was really tired of, and he was also tired. And he describes how he went into the bedroom of his parents' house, which is where he was living, and he just sort of lay on the bed, and he had about a half an hour before he had to drive off to teach his class. He talked about how he just visualized all the letters. I mean, he wasn't doing this on purpose as an exercise. It was just, he was lying there exhausted, and the picture of all the letters he had to write came to him, and everything in him just rebelled against the need to write those letters. And then he thought about the drive he would have to make to get to where he was giving his class, and everything in him rebelled against having to take that drive. And he sort of just, everything that he could think of, his response to it was, "I don't want it. I don't want these circumstances in my life." But instead, he began to shift. Well, the letters are there. The letters have to be answered. Whether I am in favor of doing it or not, it has to be done. Why rebel against it? Why not just accept it? Now, you don't think of the word contentment in that context, but really, he was content. He was content with the necessity to put out all the energy to answer the letters. He thought about the drive in the car. He thought about, the class, night after night, all these classes he had to teach, the bills he had to pay. And what he took away was his resistance to the circumstances of his life, which he himself had also set up, but it was his responsibility to master. And then when he got up, he said he was so full of energy, perfectly happy. He went and taught the class, which, as it happened, was on energization. And he says he came home and he stayed up till 2 a.m, answering the letters and doing all the rest of the work he needed. Because once he was content with his circumstances, all of this energy was released. So this is where Swami says contentment that just comes because things are already the way I want them can be lost in an instant. It has no staying power because as soon as conditions change, contentment based on external conditions will be lost. And change is the only certainty in life. And therefore, that's why most people suffer and are unhappy. He said, contentment, if practiced determinedly, can remain under every circumstance. Because we see what we're also talking about is what comes of itself, let it come. Whatever God sends me is exactly what I need. Because any rebellion against the circumstances we find ourselves in. Now, rebellion is different than accepting these conditions and making a decision that they need to be changed. That's not rebellion. That's an honest, clear-minded appraisal of what I have to, of reality, and then a decision to put out energy to shift that reality. You can shift that reality not because you're discontent, but because you're content with the necessity to shift the reality. Do you see what I mean? It's a very important distinction. Otherwise, what is the practice of contentment? It becomes weak-willed. And weak-willed is absolutely the last thing we want. None of Patanjali's 10 guidelines as the fundamental practice of yoga is about decreasing your will. So if we misunderstand contentment as meaning weak-willed, we've simply misunderstood it. Because it can't be. It's not possible. It's not possible to be one of Patanjali's yamas or niyamas and be weak-willed. It's oxymoronic. So something has to shift. And since it is named by Patanjali, the understanding has to shift. And then he says something very interesting. Good company is important too. Without it, contentment may be too difficult to practice steadfastly. Because if we're with people who are complaining or who are low energy, who are habitually negative, it's not merely that they become persuasive, it's that there's an actual magnetic exchange. Master made the statement that environment is stronger than willpower. I read that when I was probably 19, I probably was when I read it. I rebelled against it. I just thought, not stronger than my willpower. There was absolutely no basis for my rebellion against it. I just didn't like it. It made me sound and feel helpless. So I didn't want it to be true. Also, at that moment, I didn't have much control over my environment. But as I have grown on the spiritual path, I've certainly seen the enormous influence that environment has on us and the company we keep. Master went so far as to say, whether your consciousness is drawn upward toward God or outward toward the world depends on the company you keep. I mean, that's a very strong statement. And I believe he made it to the ashramites. Maybe he said it to the public, but I think it was an internal statement he made. The company you keep. Now, of course, we don't always have a choice. Sometimes the worst company is our own close relatives, and we don't have an option to get away from them. One of the disciples asked Master when he said that, depending on the company you keep, but the disciple asked, what if I am alone? And Master replied, am I not always with you? So there's an answer there to the question of the company you keep, which is not entirely and only the human beings or the plants or the animals that surround you. It's also what kind of inner company are you keeping? Where is our consciousness? Where is our mind? Are we constantly preoccupied with the people around us? Are we constantly talking and listening to the people around us? Are we having conversations that we wished we could have had but didn't have the wherewithal to say it at the time with people who were not in the room? I was in a situation not too long ago where I was in a big disagreement with a lot of people, and I realized that I was constantly having mental conversations with people who weren't in the room. And so the company I was keeping was very disharmonious, even though I was completely alone. And there was no reason for me to be in that disharmonious company, except I kept putting my mind there. So when we are alone, we can choose our company. We can choose it through chant, through prayer. Nowadays, with so many electronic media, we can choose it through videos, we can choose it through music. We can choose it through podcasts. We can choose it through all sorts of ways. And so he says, good company too is important. Without it, contentment may be too difficult to practice. And he says, if you mix with contented people, you would automatically begin to acquire their magnetism and to grow in contentment yourself. And so then Swami says, that's why I invited you to take your next vacation at Ananda. We've always had a guest retreat as long as there's been a community. Our guest retreat is at Ananda Village primarily. And it's just like, you need to come and immerse yourself, he's saying to this person. If you want to grow into contentment, you need to dip yourself in the magnetism of contentment. And when you're at Ananda with serious yogis, the chances are at least better that many of them will have the magnetism. Because see, a lot of it is an exchange of magnetism. And what happens when we exchange magnetism is that it's not just an idea anymore. It becomes an experience. I remember when I didn't live at Ananda Village and I first started coming to visit, it's impossible to describe what it felt like in those first visits. And this would have been like 1970. Was that the first time I came? Yes, I met Swami in 1969. I came to Ananda Village in 1970, and then I moved about 6 or 9 months after that. But just, it takes my breath away even to think about it. Just the way it felt. I had never been in a holy atmosphere. I wrote about it in my book Light Bearer, which I'm always trying to remind people that they ought to read, all about 45 years of life with Swami. But I talked about when I first went and stood on Ananda property, and I explained in there that I was raised Jewish, but we were not active Jews. We went to synagogue somewhat, but after my older brother had his bar mitzvah, we didn't go back that often. And I'd never been on pilgrimage. None of these ideas were really strong in my mind. But when I was standing on Ananda ground, and especially when I was standing on the porch of what was then the dining room, looking across to where Swami was sitting under a tree, the word holy ground came to me. And I'd never even known what that meant. But I was standing on holy ground. And the people I met were just different than anybody I'd ever known. Because I had a small coterie of friends, and we were all striving spiritually. But to be with people who were really living the spiritual life, it just changed me just to stand there without even communicating. So I certainly know from my own experience, and Swami's saying here, come to Ananda for a vacation, because everything will click into place. I've often said to people, just go to the Expanding Light Retreat, just go spend a week or even a weekend there, because you'll see it's a whole environment, and it'll just demonstrate to you, just by its very vibration, that there's a wholly, entirely other way to be. And when we begin to capture that, just even as a concept, everything begins to change. So, now, this letter was written on December 26th, right after Christmas, in the year 2000. I know who this was written to, but I don't think it really matters. I do want you to grow spiritually through your service to God. My concern always is to keep you from letting your ego consciousness interfere with your spiritual advancement. I'm less concerned with boosting your ego than with encouraging soul consciousness in you. I'm also well aware that a discouraged ego can hinder your progress. Therefore, I do my best also to help keep you out of that trap. And I'm very happy to see you stabilizing in this regard. You see how honest Swami is? He just, he's very careful because the person he's talking to is vulnerable, but he also is very frank. I do want you to grow in your service. And so he says, do I want you to do this? And he puts it in quotes, business? I really don't know. I want you to succeed in it, and I'm not really sure you have a business head. I think of it in terms of serving Master and Ananda anyway, not advancing your own interests. That's always how I viewed my own work. How much am I for what you're doing? It all depends on how much it's helping you spiritually. That's really my only criteria. My love and best wishes always. I stated that I know who this letter is to, but I'm not entirely certain. And as I said, I don't really think it matters. I want you to go see what the person had written. What I believe was going on here is that the person had actually was sort of trying to develop a certain aspect of Ananda. That's why Swami put the words business in quotes, because it wasn't an independent enterprise for that person to make money. It was more that the person would take responsibility for developing a certain aspect of Ananda. But the way Ananda has always worked is that everything has to be self-supporting. So there has to be a business aspect to it. We have never yet, to this day, developed sufficient resources or had patrons for. There's great generosity within Ananda, but we've never had patrons who would just write checks for everything. Some departments, some areas, yes, but for the most part, we've always had to generate sufficient income, which in a way is positive because it keeps you from just coasting and just assuming because I want to do it, God wants me to do it. You have to make sure that what you're doing generates sufficient energy to be self-supporting. Swamiji was always thinking in terms of things being self-supporting. So even though I believe this was an Ananda department, it was being developed and it had to become viable. So the person is asking, do you really want, but the person, here's what I'm trying to say. I believe the person involved in this, and this is also what's in the letter, had a certain stake in succeeding, wanted to succeed at this business, and so wanted to be able to take charge and be able to do it. But Swami answers, I want you to grow spiritually through your service to God, but I'm always also, my concern always is to keep you from letting your ego consciousness interfere with your spiritual advancement. So the person's inclination to want to make a success of it so they could claim success was sort of balanced against Swami's concern that if they sort of went in it to make a personal success out of it, that it was going to strengthen their ego instead of weaken it, and would that really be a good thing or not? Swami was sort of on the horns of a dilemma. He said, I'm less concerned with boosting your ego than encouraging their soul consciousness. But then he says, but I also know that a discouraged ego is also a hindrance. See, this is where ego is a little complicated. That's why you can't just squelch somebody's creativity. You can't squelch their need to feel competent and capable, and the need to be able to put out your energy and see the positive result of it. So Swamiji was sort of betwixt and between. He wanted to help this person develop this sense of confidence and self-worth without that turning in the wrong direction. But if he tried to discourage him from doing it for fear it was the wrong direction, it would encourage the person also to feel discouraged and depressed because he wasn't competent. Swami was just caught in all of this because he saw the whole syndrome of who he was writing to. That's what this is all about. So Swami just says, I'm doing my best, and then he gives him a little encouragement. You're stabilizing. So then it comes to, do I really want you to do this business? And Swami says, quite frankly, I really don't know. I want you to succeed because if you take it on and succeed, that would be very good for you. But I'm not really sure you have the capability to succeed. Swami's being very honest, and he's also trying to make this person be honest. I remember in a different circumstance entirely, this man really wanted to start a business, and Swami really didn't want him to start a business because one, he wasn't sure he could succeed at it, and two, he also said, and he said to the man, but the man didn't hear it, spiritually speaking, you don't need to make a success out of business. That the person wanted for himself to be a successful businessman, but Swami said, spiritually, you don't need that. And the guy didn't hear any of it. And he started the business, and it turned out to be a disaster. And after it all came back around, I told him what Swami had said in the meeting. And I knew it was what Swami had said because we had discussed it ourselves. But he never even heard it. He never heard Swami say, spiritually you can advance without doing this. his ego was so determined. You know, things get very confused, especially in the early years of Ananda, men especially. Sort of, a lot of the men came with this masculine sort of desire to be successful in the world, and it was a little bit at odds sometimes with the actual necessity of making Ananda itself a success. I remember trying to, being a female, I just never had that. I didn't have that same drive. To try to get, we tried to get people to understand that we all had one career together, and that career was to make Ananda itself a success. I'm talking in the 70s. And that if each of us just did our part, whatever that part was, and the entire project succeeded, then each of us would have had a huge personal success. And it really mattered much less whether my little business or my little department, whether I could claim that I had done this. But Swami is very sensitive about this. You know, I want you to succeed, but I'm not sure you can. I'm not sure you actually have the inherent magnetism to succeed. So I really don't know. He said, and then he corrected his thinking. Why are you thinking of this as a business? I think of it as a service to Master and Ananda. So Swami was just sort of planting all these different ideas in this person's mind if they were able to really understand them all. How much am I for what you're doing? It all depends on how much it's helping you spiritually. That's my only real criteria. But Swamiji doesn't declare. You see, this is also just a typical, more complicated than many, because the person he was writing to, I believe, was exceedingly complicated. But Swami never said yes or no. He just sort of laid out what he was concerned about. And that was often the way Swami would advise us. You know, people have this picture of the spiritual leader lays down the law like this. Swamiji never did that. It was just not in him to do it, nor did Master actually, nor even did Sri Yukteswar much of the time, even though people think he did. Swamiji would present to us what he was concerned about. And in this case, he never took a stand. Sometimes he'd take more of a stand. But it wasn't just so that you would walk away and say, Swami said yes, Swami said no. It was, I'm concerned. I don't want your ego to be discouraged, but nor do I want it to be inflated. I recognize that you want to have the success, but do you really have the right combination of talents for this? The person, if I'm correct in this, had many other talents, but being a businessman may not have been one of them. Are you really a businessman? Is this really what you can do? It was a question. It wasn't a declaration, it was a question. And then the final result was, will this help you grow spiritually? But Swami didn't answer the question. It just left the individual really to meditate on it and reflect, what are my motivations? Why am I doing this? Because with all of that to work with, it was possible to come not merely to a decision in this matter, but to use this decision to understand how to make decisions, and to use this decision also as an opportunity for deep introspection. So it was a great letter. And I don't know what the result of it was. I have some ideas, but I don't know for sure. So I always felt when we were working with Swamiji that if we didn't grow spiritually, we had nobody to blame but ourselves. He just worked so hard for us. In fact, I remember once he said to us, for some reason, I have this picture of about 8 of us lined up on a couple of couches as if we were in a straight line in front of him. I really don't think such a circumstance could have arisen, but I sort of had the feeling of just like sitting there while he said this to us. He said, you all have it so much easier than I did when I was with Master. He said, Master never explained anything. He just would hint. He said, sometimes it wouldn't even be words, it would just be the way he would look at you or a thought he would project to you. And then Swami said, I bend over backwards to explain things to you. And he did. You know, just like even this. The question was, should I take on this business? Swami could have just said yes or no. But he didn't. He gave him the whole picture of his own psychology, you know, of the psychological situation, so that we can learn for ourselves. Because, of course, Swamiji is not in the body to ask questions. He's very much in the ether, so to speak. Those who think him near, he responds. But you can't just ask him or write him a letter and get an answer. So we need also to be able to put ourselves into alignment. So, the next letter is from November 15th, 1991. The best way to find out whether this is your path is simply to try it first and see. Guidance rarely comes to us when we sit back and wait for it. So long as you take positive steps, God will guide you toward the further steps to take. But if you wait for guidance to present itself to you full-blown, it may never come. The secret of attracting guidance is to raise one's level of energy. By moving forward in the best way we know, we generate a flow of energy that can draw God's guidance to us. This is true even when our initial understanding isn't as clear as we'd like. So long as we use common sense, keep an attitude of openness, and offer our best efforts up to God, our understanding will grow in time. You wrote of feeling the need to make a spiritual commitment. You are blessed to feel this way. If you are feeling inspired by Yogananda's teachings, why not commit yourself to them provisionally? Yogananda promised that anyone who was not his disciple, but who came to him sincerely seeking his own true path, would be led to it. We must all seek God inside us in meditation, but it is a mistake to suppose that we can find him on our own. It is his way to come to us through human instruments, particularly through divinely awakened masters and their disciples. Yogananda's vibration is very much alive here at Ananda. Since you've already felt to visit us and to write to me, it seems natural for you to try to deepen your connection here. If you feel inspired to go to another of Yogananda's disciples instead, that's fine, of course. But don't try to do it on your own. The spiritual path is just too challenging for that. May God and the Masters bless you with clarity and joy in your search. So there's just a tremendous number of different ideas here. So I'll just start at the beginning and we'll run through some of them. The best way to find out whether this is your path is to try it out. You know, it's a question that people often write. How do I know what my path is? And it's not an easy question to answer because intuition is not that easy to come by. Sometimes you're trying to evaluate the master, but you don't really have the capacity to have real attunement with the guru yet. One of the ways that's very helpful is, how do you feel about the people who follow the path? If the people who follow the path that you're considering embracing, do they feel like brothers and sisters? Do they seem like the kind of person that you would like to become? Because in some ways you can tell more about what the guru and the path is like by looking at the disciples, because they are the fruit of the exercise you're about to embrace. And if they're if they impress you as having qualities that you don't want. Some, depending on the ashram and depending on who's in charge and how it's interpreted, some ashramites are very aloof. Some are quite disinvolved with the world around them. Some are quite emotional and are always, hugging and affirming the relationships with each other. Some are very solitary in their pursuits. Some are quite regimented and everybody does the same thing. Some are very restrained in their self-expression. Others are free in their self-expression. Just countless characteristics. So you need to look at those people and ask, is this who I want to become? Because if you follow the path sincerely, this is who you will become. And again, there's sometimes a recognition. You might have a recognition more with the disciples in the ashram before you actually have a recognition with the guru. It just depends. All these things are part of it. But the other thing that Swami here now, he starts talking about guidance itself. Guidance rarely comes when we sit back and wait for it. But if you take positive steps, God will guide you in the further steps. But if you just wait for the guidance to be crystal clear, usually you'll just have to wait. When I met Swami Kriyananda, he did not present himself as the guru of this path, and it was not It was not even an undercurrent that he himself was the source of what was happening. He was clearly in charge. He was the driving force of manifesting Ananda, but he made it clear, and it was understood that the ruling deity, the ruling guru of the whole enterprise was Paramhansa Yogananda, and that Swami was a disciple of Master, and even when he gave Kriya initiation or any other kind of initiation, it was never on his own behalf at that time. It was always on behalf of Master. So you couldn't really consider yourself just to be Kriyananda's disciple, so to speak, or even a disciple of Ananda. There was very little Ananda at that point. It was a fledgling community in a rural zone, struggling just to survive day to day, to have enough waterproof structure so we could get through another winter. It was nothing was clear cut. When I met Swami Kriyananda, I owned a copy of Autobiography of a Yogi. I remember that I tried to read it, but it just didn't hold me. I had been reading Vivekananda mostly, who was very intellectual and very philosophical. Perhaps there was devotion in Vivekananda's writing, but if it was there, it wasn't what attracted me. What attracted me was the philosophy and the intellect behind it, which were very impressive. So when I started Autobiography of a Yogi, it was such a different vibration. It was so flowing, it was so devotional, it was so from the heart, it was so, in a very real sense, non-linear. I don't mean in any way that it was not rational or reasonable or brilliant, but it wasn't the linear kind of teaching that I was enjoying in what I was reading in Vivekananda. And it was also, there were miracles, there were a lot of phenomenon in it. And I was a snob. I was I didn't know what I was doing, but that didn't keep me from having opinions. I was sort of a purist. I didn't want phenomenon, I just wanted the straight story. Why I had even an opinion like that, but I did. So I read a little of Autobiography of a Yogi and put it away, and continued in my spiritual search. Then I met Swami Kriyananda, and I've told the story too many times to have to retell it here. Instantaneously, I just knew. The word that works for me when I say it is pole star. He just exemplified everything I wanted to become, just exactly what I was saying. Here was the living reality of what I wanted to be, and I'd never seen it before. I knew in theory that this fulfillment of the promise of the teachings of self-realization I was reading, I knew it was a true potential, but I had never seen it. And why I recognized it, I can only say thank you, God, that I did. But it wasn't really possible to become Kriyananda's disciple. He wasn't a guru. The organization of the ashram was not conventional. So it was Yogananda that I needed, to relate to. So because of Kriyananda, I read Autobiography of a Yogi, and I loved it. It was very interesting. It was like I needed Kriyananda in there before I could relate to Yogananda. That was just the way it worked for me. But I was deeply devoted to Sri Ramakrishna. I've mentioned Vivekananda. But Vivekananda was the disciple of Ramakrishna, and Ramakrishna was the source. And I was very deeply devoted to Ramakrishna, who incidentally was quite a bhakti. He wasn't an intellectual like Vivekananda, now that I think about it. Interesting. I'm just going to say this because it's so interesting. My heart was completely drawn to Ramakrishna. And when I think about it, it's Ramakrishna that I feel. I don't really feel Vivekananda. I think about Vivekananda because it was his teachings that I loved, but my heart was with Ramakrishna, so much so that I didn't know if I could give my heart to Yogananda. So, but I knew that Swami was my pole star. So I had to go, I had to be there. So I was like, who is my guru? Is Yogananda my guru or Ramakrishna? And here's what I realized. It was impossible for me to make that decision because I didn't have sufficient intuition to perceive it. It was too subtle a truth, and I didn't have intuition. And I knew if I just sat there waiting for intuition, I wasn't doing anything to develop intuition, so why would it ever come to me? But if I went with what I did know, which is that I wanted to be where Swami Kriyananda was, and if I just went with what I did know, committed myself to as much as I knew, then I would change. And if I changed, then I would have intuition, then I would know the answer. So I remember I just threw myself into Ananda as if all of it was crystal clear. And I said to Ramakrishna and to Yogananda, basically, you guys sort this out. I knew they were both true, and there was no competition, and they would sort it out. And about a year after I moved there, literally, I just woke up one morning, said, of course you belong to Master, who else would you belong to? And then I never thought about it again. It just settled itself. But really, if I had waited, I'd still be sitting in San Francisco, because nothing would have happened. So it's not just a question of deciding your path, it's all kinds of intuition. If you don't know what to do, don't do nothing, because you have to, as he puts it here. The secret of attracting guidance is to raise your level of energy, because if your energy is too low, you can't attract it. By moving forward in the best way we know, we generate energy, and that energy will draw more guidance to it. Energy has its own intelligence, is the other way Swami puts it. And so once energy starts moving, it begins to speak to you, because you begin to have experiences, and those experiences awaken other understandings. Those understandings lead to other experiences, and pretty soon you've moved. And then when you ask the same question from a different place, then all of a sudden you can get a different answer. It's very important to have the courage to do that. It's all about sincerity. It's all about intention. You don't go out to prove something. You just act, this is the best I know, so I'm going to try it and see what happens. So long as we use common sense, as long as we remain open, and as long as we offer everything we're doing up to God. I remember a man once said, he talked to Swami, he was about to do something that Swamiji thought was ill-advised and proved to be so. And as the man was sort of leaving, he said to Swami something like, well, if Master doesn't want me to do it, he can stop me. And after the man walked out, Swami turned to me and somewhat sadly, he said, why would he? Why would he stop him? He said, an attitude like that is not an attitude of guide me and bless me, Master, and show me what the right path is. It's this is what I'm going to do, and if you don't like it, you can stop me. He said that kind of challenge does not attract the Guru's response. The Guru just lets you go and do whatever you want. Common sense, openness, and to offer everything we're doing up to God. That was my position when I came to Ananda. You've brought me to Swamiji, you've brought me to this place. It all seems everything I want. The problem here is this really my path? Who is my Guru? I can't do anything about that. But I offered it with great faith at the feet of God, at the feet of the Gurus, both of them, and just said, I offer this to you. There was no arrogance in it on my part. And that man was just being so arrogant. It's like, I'm going to just follow my own will, and then God will stop me if I'm not supposed to do it. And then Swamiji also addresses this man saying, you feel the need to make a commitment, to go deeper spiritually, and you're drawn to Yogananda. And then he suggests, make a provisional commitment. And this is, I didn't have this in my mind, but I've heard this said in many places, that Master promises, if you come sincerely to me, even with the thought in your mind that you're my disciple, but in truth you belong somewhere else, I'll just take you there. The Masters work together. See, we have this strange idea that, they're jealous of each other, or if you commit yourself in one and you belong to another, they'll be upset. It's exactly the opposite. They all just work together to help us. I really feel now Ramakrishna took wonderful care of me, and also St. Francis, because those were two very important major influences in my life before I met Swami and before I came to Master. But they just took care of me because for various reasons, I don't know why, it was an appropriate cycle for me. And I felt their loving care, and I still do to this day. And everybody's happy with everybody. We've all worked together, and the result has been pretty good. And so if you feel like making a commitment, and you have a true path in front of you, And don't just pick up anything because you feel like making a commitment. But he feels drawn to Master. And then Swami warns him that even though the path is inward, it's very hard to follow it by yourself. After I'd been living at Ananda for a while, one of the ways that Master's organization, Self-Realization Fellowship, helps train people is through this written correspondence course. And of course, there's only so many temples. Ananda or SRF only has so many physical places. So especially, I'm talking about the 70s, the way they could reach you was with these written lessons. So for a while before I moved to Ananda, I was taking that written course. They would be a few pages long and they would arrive once a week. After I began to live at Ananda, and I had the experience of Swami's direct teaching, those correspondence lessons didn't have a lot of magnetism for me. And in fact, there was a certain point, it was supposed to be a rule at Ananda at that time that you also had to take the SRF lessons. And they just began to stack up on my table unopened. They just, because when they would come, I would have been listening to Swami all morning and working with him in the evening and just doing all this, and then this little correspondence lesson would come. And I had spiritual friends, and I was living in community and everything, and then this lesson would come, and it would just have a few good ideas in it, and then there would be another. Finally, they stacked up. They were very inexpensive, but I had very little money. And I remember one day, I still remember, I just looked at them, and I sort of like, with this devilish, girlish glee, I thought, I could just cancel these lessons. It was so like, I don't really have to take these lessons anymore. It was very freeing, and so I didn't. I stopped. But I said to Swamiji in one context, I said, somebody who lives out in the middle of the country, out in Idaho or somewhere in Colorado or Montana, who doesn't know anybody else who's on the path, and all they ever have to teach them, because there was no internet in those days or anything like that, all they ever have to teach them is these written lessons. How do they ever make any spiritual progress? Now, I don't want to discourage people. Well, everything's changed now, because with online you have a wholly different potential, which is still not the same as being there in person, but it's certainly better. But I said, sir, if all they get is these lessons, how do they make any spiritual progress? Swami said, they don't. It was just, they don't. He said, but if they're sincere, more will come to them. They will attract more opportunities. So it wasn't like a condemnation. It's like, you poor sap, you're there and nothing will happen for you. It's that if you really want more, then you will, somehow or another, you will magnetize more to you. So here he's saying, the path is just too hard to do it by yourself. And this is a common misunderstanding, because we seek God inside, the practice is meditation, go on alone, it's just between you and God. But environment is stronger than willpower. And the ego is a very wily companion, and is very, very good at confusing and misleading us. And if we don't have the opportunity to be in the right kind of magnetism, what to speak of the example of others, the opportunity to see how our ideas of the path measure up to the way it's really carried out, to be able to ask questions that are not just general questions with a stock answer that comes from somebody who doesn't know you, but somebody who's right in front of you and can actually feel what it is that you're really asking and answer you truly. It's very, very difficult. In fact, it's well nigh impossible, which is why Master was so strong on spiritual communities. And right now there's only a few, but satsang and community is vitally important, which is why now that we have the internet, we do everything we can to reach people everywhere, because many people are stuck somewhere for whatever reason where they're virtually the only one. But now with this online, it's not as good as in person, but it's way better than being alone. And we can really get to know each other, since this is being recorded in June of 2020, when a lot of us are very restricted in our ability to be together. But I've been doing these online satsangs from California. I've talked to a group in Serbia. I've talked to groups in Oregon. Tomorrow I'll talk to a group in India. The other day I was talking to a group in Australia. And even though they're just little boxes on the screen, somehow we are really together and something really happens. So it is not a substitute, but it's definitely a step in the right direction, because the spiritual path is just too hard to do it alone. And of course, at least through Ananda, a wealth of personal contact. You don't just have to be one of 20 on the screen. You can make a direct contact with any one of dozens of highly qualified yogis who can personalize the experience for you. So don't for a moment think that you have to do it by yourself. And with all due respect, don't trust yourself too much until you have tested your own ideas against the clarity of someone that you have come to trust has clear impersonal wisdom for you. And I always encourage this. Make friends. Take the time to make spiritual friends and spend enough time in conversation or in their company to really feel that you know who you're talking to. Because someone whose impersonal wisdom you trust is absolutely invaluable on the spiritual path. It just cannot be emphasized enough how tremendously important that is. Not that you want to be under obedience to them. In fact, if they try to put you under obedience, that's a very good sign that perhaps you shouldn't be talking to that person. But if they want to help you, and you genuinely feel helped to be clearer and stronger in yourself, that's what you're looking for. I had that, I want to say, growing up. I often think of myself that I spent my spiritual childhood at Ananda Village, even though I came at the age of 24, and I was close to 40 when I moved away from Ananda Village. But I didn't move into a vacuum. I still had close, deep relationships and constant contact with Swami. Innumerable times, Swami, Jyotish, Devi, Seva, Prakash, I can name half a dozen people, Ananta. I would just present to them what I thought might be true, and they would respond to me as to what they thought might be true. Now, Swami was less tentative in talking to Swami, but I just tested my ideas continuously. I expressed them, and I heard them as I said them. Other people responded as to whether or not I was on the right track or not, and with Swami especially, of course, he would just constantly correct me. If I'd just been left to figure it out, Mamma Mia, because words on a page, they can mean so many things, and even worse than that, Master said, even more concerning than that, Master said, to be successful on the spiritual path, you need to do, I believe it's 1% of what he suggested. I used to say it was 10%, but recently I heard it was 1% of what he suggested. But every devotee will have their own 1%, Master said. And that's why he had to teach so many different things. But when you're sitting there all by yourself, it's not always clear to you which 1% is your percent. I have a friend whose tendency is to be over-disciplined and to always be squelching and squeezing and trying to be more intense. And every time things don't go well, they try to be more intense, when that's just not what's needed. But there's just this tendency, whatever direction you're going, you just keep going in it. I've seen it happen to people in the field of diet. And it concerns me a great deal. I myself have been through enough series of, I've never been that radical though, enough series of different kinds of understanding about what's healthy and what's not healthy. But I've seen people start down the pathway that the problem is toxins in some way, or even allergens, but allergens that are guessed at rather than actually verified. And both toxins and allergens are valid, but people will start down a road of removing things. depriving themselves of wheat or barley or tofu or cottage cheese or cheddar cheese or milk or this or sugar or that. They'll just keep removing, and the mindset will be that what's coming in is poisoning me, so I have to get more and more out. And in more than one occasion, I've seen that the net result of that was not ultimately that they were being poisoned, but that they were starving because everything was taken away. And then there would still be a feeling that I'm not dynamically healthy, so I will take more away. Whereas when it finally sometimes reaches a crisis point, we're actually working with deficiencies that have been exacerbated by the extreme decisions. These are just, that's just one example, but it can happen mentally just as easily. So we need other devotees on the spiritual path who can be a mirror to us. And we need to use, and I'll use his word here, common sense and openness, and an offering rather than demand, that you agree with me, and sort of a hard-hearted resistance. If God doesn't want me to do it, he'll stop me. No, it's, Lord, what do you want me to do? Guide me. What do you think of what I'm doing when you're talking to your friends? Have you heard it? Does this work? Do you have any ideas about this? And what do you think it's doing to me? So, and then Swami just puts a touch in here which implies all through the years of Ananda, especially this is 1991, there was always this question whether Ananda was a legitimate expression of Yogananda's work. Because the first organization founded by Yogananda himself was Self-Realization Fellowship. Swamiji was a very influential, central figure in that work for 14 years. Then he was expelled for reasons that are complicated, but are explained in Light Bear and explained in other places. And ever thereafter, well, see, Self-Realization Fellowship, and this is my vernacular way of putting it, was the first church of self-realization. And the first church of whatever, the first church of, has a monopoly because it's the first church. And so there's always a point at which there's a second church. And then usually soon after there's a third, fourth, fifth, and sixth in America where these things proliferate. And there's often a conflict between the first and second church. And the second church is almost always founded by someone who either withdrew in dispute or was expelled from the first. In Swami's case, he was expelled, but he never accepted that expulsion from the organization expelled him from his discipleship. So, but because the first church of made it pretty clear that the second church of, which was us, was heretical and not a true representative, and that was the position they held forever. Anybody who was thinking about wanting to follow Yogananda's teachings, many people who were thinking, had to sort of sort that out. Is it safe to come to Ananda, or am I actually betraying Master as the first church would try to make them think? So the Swami implies that here, that question. So he says, Yogananda's vibration is very much alive here at Ananda. For some reason, Swami felt he had to say it, which was probably meant that there was a challenge in this man's communication or this woman's communication. Since you've already felt to visit us and write to me, it seems natural for you to try deepening your connection here. And that was how Swami always answered the question, I don't know, why don't you come and see? Go where you feel inspired. And Swami would answer questions directly when asked, but he would never tell people, no, you should come here, or you shouldn't go there. Never. And so then he said, if you feel inspired to go to another of Yogananda's disciples instead, that's fine, of course. There were also several other disciples who had groups. Roy Eugene Davis comes to mind, and a few others. So you had choices. You were drawn to Master, and then if you felt through another expression that it was better, Swami's attitude was always, of course. But you're writing to me, and you're drawn here, and you're thinking of coming, why not come? And then, again, always with Swami, you'll find out. And then you can make up your mind. Instead of sitting here wanting to know, before we have the nerve to take a step. So, very helpful and good advice. So, now, this letter was written in August of 1988. Swami says, I'm sorry to hear about your discouragement. It is the negative side of humility to feel inadequate, to doubt one's abilities. You have much humility, and the humbler we are, the better God can work through us. It is right and true to recognize one's own fallibility. God's is the only true strength and guidance. Only egotists glory in their own cleverness and ability. In so doing, they shut God out, and in the end, fail. But there is another side to humility too. To feel inadequate is one thing, but to feel badly about it, or to take too personally other people's criticisms, is possible only because, despite your humility, there is some ego involvement. Otherwise, you would feel joy in your own nothingness and in God's everythingness. Give it all to Him. The more you do so, the more you will find Him using you in everything. I think He has given you these tests for you to learn these lessons. So apparently what happened here is that somebody was criticized for what they were doing, and then it made them feel really discouraged because it is in this person, or was in this person, a sense of not really being good enough, of unworthiness, of being inadequate to the task. And apparently also there was some genuine humility, which is the realization that, I don't need to be self-important. I just am doing my best, and that's all I'm doing. I don't have to be proud and self-involved in what I'm doing. But this humility has to be based on actual self-honesty. That's the phrase that Yogananda gives us, which extricates us from this conundrum. Because humility, to feel inadequate and therefore to be concerned about one's own position, and the way Swami puts it is, it's all right to recognize our limitations. To feel inadequate is one thing, but to feel badly about it is something else. Do you understand the difference? It's a very important point. You can say, I'm just not that good at what I'm doing. But then to say, oh, I'm just not good at it. I just can't do it. I'm not able to do it. And then when someone says, you didn't really do that very well, then you just collapse because I know I'm just helpless at it. I can't really make it happen like this. Then you wouldn't be reacting like that unless, as he puts it, there's some ego involvement in it. Otherwise, it's just the way it is. Yeah, this is the best I can do. I'm going to tell this story on myself, which makes me look pretty good, but it is actually something that really happened. A person came to me, and I've told this before, but it was a very interesting experience for me, because I have my share of ego, God knows that I do, and I also have my share of inadequacy, and I feel bad about it. Mostly, I would actually say I used to. To be fair to myself, I've really overcome a lot of it. But this person came to me and told me what a terrible leader I was. I was working in a leadership position in this community, and he just told me how awful I was as a leader. And I responded immediately without any discomfort. I said, do you think if I really knew how to do this job well, I would still be doing it? Which is, of course, I'm here to learn. And it was very interesting to me. I was just completely undefensive because I was inadequate in the job. That was just the facts of the matter. I hope someday to be better, and I do believe over the years I've gotten better. But I didn't feel badly about my inadequacy. It was just, in that particular moment, it was just the way it is. A friend of mine in another ashram was assigned the responsibility of I think she had to run their retreat. It was some pretty big job. And it just wasn't her strong suit to have to administrate an organization with lots of people. She was a very good teacher, and she worked really well as a singleton, just teaching people. To be in charge and have to administrate and keep everybody informed, she wasn't any good at it, and it just wasn't going very well. And so finally, she was in a meditation, and she said, She just decided to lay the whole thing at the feet of her guru, who was, she had a living teacher at that time, a living master, but she made the offer in her meditation. She said, Guruji, you want this job done well, you get somebody else. If you're content with the way I'm doing it, you leave me in it. It's up to you. And then after that, she just did her best and just let it be. Because she was inadequate. But she didn't have to feel badly about it. It was just the way that it is. You see the difference? Because her guru had put her in that position. Or God had put her in that position, and she just had to do her best, and that was simply all she could do about it. To be inadequate and to realize that all power comes from God should make us free rather than make us more bound up in ourselves. It's a very complicated issue for many of us. The negative side of humility is to feel inadequate. It is right and true to recognize one's fallibility. God's is the only true strength. Only egotists glory in their own cleverness. But then we shouldn't take too personally other people's criticisms of us. We just are what we are. Give it all to Him. The more you do so, the more you will find Him using you. And then Swami says to encourage him, I think he's given you this test to teach you some needed lessons. And that's sort of where the matter lies. Now, I'm just looking, the next one is a bit long, so I wanted to read one that was a little shorter because I wouldn't have time to comment. Well, here's something that's good. August 20th, 2000. And first, Swami's talking about, this was obviously a question in the print shop of having some materials ready in time. And he says, the question of whether there's a bottleneck in the production line is not a matter of opinion. It's just either there is or there isn't. It's not like I say there is and you say there isn't. He said our distributors will simply drop us if we don't deliver what we say we promised to deliver at the time that we promised to deliver it. And so then he says, there's always a part of us that desires perfection, but we must, I've certainly had to, though never happily in my life, adjust to objective circumstances. Sometimes a compromise of quality, though painful, is inevitable. Delivery dates are very important. We can't afford to miss them, even if it means doing something second best, which none of us wants. So you can extrapolate from the discussion that's going on here that there was probably one person in the department who was saying, I'm sorry, I know we could improve the design, but if we take it back to the design place and have to spend all those days doing it, we're not going to meet the printing deadline. And if we miss the printing deadline, I'm assuming this is publications by the way it's written. If we can't get to the printer in time, then we're not going to get it to the distributor in time, and everything's going to be lost. So, how bad is it? It's one thing if all the words are scrambled, or we have somebody else's, insides between the covers of our book. It's quite another if this design isn't as good as it could be. And I know how to fix it, but we're going to have to back everything up. And I know I've worked in print production, with people who just spent too much time making sure that every little tiny thing was done when we didn't have the margin. And I developed a certain practical system, which is, we're not going to spend 50% more time for 8% improvement. There has to just be a balance point. And this is what Swami says, even though perfection is desirable, reasonable perfection, not unreasonable perfection, but doing something as well as we can is a spiritual quality. But it's not a sin to include doing it as well as we can, to not also include meeting the promise we made to deliver a product is also perfection. Perfection is not just in all the details. That was something that was enormously liberating for me at a certain point when I began to work with someone who had a lot of good success karma. And I suddenly saw that perfection to him was the whole flow, that the whole thing flowed well, and that we kept the energy moving at all times. Whereas perfection to me had always meant I would look at this square and I had to get it exactly so. And that would often be words and design or something like that. But as a consequence, I would create a bottleneck in the energy. And my belief that this had to be exactly perfect actually was false, because that preoccupation with something that was only a part of the flow of energy cracked the whole flow of energy. And then I saw how that was when I began to realize 50% more effort for 8% improvement is not making it better, because other people become stressed, you become impatient with them, other things that are supposed to happen can't happen. And so Swami was trying to encourage this person to be practical in their idealism, is actually what he was saying. And also sympathizing. I can sympathize. It's nice if now that the cover, we have the mock-up of the cover, we realize it would have been much better if we had done it like this. But this isn't terrible. This is just not quite as good as what we now understand, but we have to do it. And that's not letting your side down. That's not being careless or irresponsible. It's just being exactly what we should be. These are very important lessons, especially for the devotee, because we have to always be looking at the big picture. Well, it's not just for the devotee, but for everyone. And so I think in this case, the person was trying to get Swami on their side. Swami, they're not doing a good enough job. These are really important. We have to do it like this. That's why he said, the question of bottleneck is an objective matter. I mean, and I think in this case, the person who wrote the letter was probably causing it and wanted to be justified in their perfectionism. And Swami was saying, no, I don't think so. I think in this case, it's you who have to shift. Swami was always completely fair. It's a small matter in a certain way, but at least speaking for myself, when I understood this differently, it liberated a tremendous amount of energy in me, because I then began to understand in a more true and definitely a more practical way what perfection actually was. A flow of energy. Not every little molecule being lined up exactly right, but being able to just get into the flow of energy and keep it moving and have it end up where we wanted it to be. And then I began to realize that many little things that I'd sort of been concerned about along the way just got swept up in this positive flow. And suddenly it just didn't really matter that much. I remember, this is slightly related to it, but Swami Kriyananda was giving a program in Rhode Island as it happened, and the days before he arrived, the weather was warm and beautiful, so they planned this whole outdoor event. And the day he came, it began, torrential rains began to pour down. The temperature dropped 20 degrees, and everything which was supposed to be outside had to suddenly be put inside. And there had been some kind of a tent, which was supposed to be just sort of open-sided, just a canopy. But then the sides had to be dropped, and we're all in there, and we have to keep our coats on, and we're hiking around in our boots. And I felt so badly. There was this beautiful altar set up, and we were all supposed to be barefoot in there, having left our shoes outside, and so we could sort of walk up on these beautiful cloths up to the altar. But instead, we're all in our muddy boots, and we're walking on these beautiful fabrics, and it was just awful. I wasn't in charge. I had no responsibility. I was just a guest. But I was conscious of, I could see everything that had been planned and how all the plans were just completely destroyed by what had happened. And it was a very important experience for me, because I realized it didn't matter at all. Because we were just doing what had to be done. And none of the details worked out, almost none of the details, and many of them were just catastrophic. But we were still, the energy was flowing beautifully. And the difference between perfection in the flow of energy and perfection in all the details, and if anybody had tried to fight with all those details, which fortunately everybody was wise enough just to give up, it would have just been a mess. But because people understood that this is what had come to us, and the perfection now was just to go ahead. And I realized to myself, when you have the chance, make it as perfect as you can in every way. But if for whatever reason, practical realities or rain, that perfection is taken away from you, if you just go with the flow and are happy and positive, it will be as perfect as it could ever be on the only level that really matters. So, my friends, God bless you.